Okay.
Okay,
All right, we'll call the meeting to order at 6 o'clock, and Chief, if you just note the roll, and then agenda consent. Sorry, my computer's still booting up. So we need a motion for the approval of the minutes from August 23rd, 2023.
I'll move approval.
Second.
Second.
All right, any corrections? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
aye,
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes have been approved. And appearances, there's nobody in the room here for appearance, and it does not appear as if there's anybody on the Zoom meeting for the appearance. Is there anybody in the waiting room? No, there is not. Nobody in the waiting room, so we will close the appearance section. There is no unfinished business. We go on to item 6A, which is the discussion action on the removal of the Winona General Ordinance 152 1C, and this is by the fire chief.
Well, good evening. So this was something that came up when I first got hired here. It unfortunately fell down on the priority list. I was just out at a Medicare compliance billing conference last week. So it came back up to the forefront. So currently under 152-1, which is the ambulance ordinance, we have a provision that any active member of Winona EMS or Winona Fire or the immediate family living in the same household shall not be charged ambulance transportation fees. We have to strike that. It's not an option because we receive Medicare and Medicaid dollars. The anti-kickback law of 1997, I believe it is we can't charge somebody less than what Medicare gets charged. So for us to not send a bill, we're giving service for free. But that
Less or more, sorry.
we cannot charge somebody less than what we charge Medicare. And unfortunately, what we charge Medicare is the full ambulance bill. What they choose to pay is far less than that, but we can't charge less than the full ambulance bill to any member of that we transport. If they audit us and find we actually lose all Medicare dollars that they've paid out since the incident occurred. Wow. Including interest. The federal government always wants their interest. So, so my proposal is we just strike that. I'll probably work with city staff and our alders to see if we want to somehow replace that with something a little bit more legal. But as it stands right now, it's blatantly illegal. So my ask is to forward this to the council to have it removed from the ordinance.
I would say removal makes sense, especially if you finish the remaining sentence in there right now. Which has to do with transport within the city. Why would you need to be transported in the city by an ambulance? Probably goes back.
No, what it really tied for, so if Madison comes in to transport you, this doesn't apply. So if you're transported from within the city limits is what the meaning of the ordinance is. So if we pick,
That's not the way it's written.
yeah, if we pick Dan up at home, he would not get a bill if he was transported by Winona Fire Department.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
I
that's-
definitely read it the way you
Yeah.
did.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's two reasons.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
As it reads, yes, we have no place to transport people anyway.
Yes.
So.
Right,
All right, well, easy enough. Any general questions? I figured there probably would not be. All right, just the emotion that the recommendation out of this group is to recommend council to remove this item from the ordinance.
I'll move.
And
I'll second.
Right. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, item B.
Thank you.
Discussion and action on the ambulance transport fees for 2024. For eventually a recommendation to finance committee.
Yeah, so this is an annual thing that we look at. What was included in the packet, you'll notice it's much simpler than what was in there. Prior practice was to do non-resident resident billing. What we found 18 months ago, there were several lawsuits nationally, not with us, of people suing for either being charged resident rates or non-resident rates. And how that used to be determined was my medics had to determine that based on their home address. So you would click non-resident or resident based on what their home address is. The billing company is unwilling to take that liability on, and to be honest, I don't want that liability on my folks either. So I consolidated to a single charge rather than everybody gets charged the same amount, whether they're from here or away from here. The rates you'll notice are raising. So we do a survey with our billing company every year. They do reach out to all their clients. What are you billing for, basically? I got that. I also reached out to all of our neighboring departments. We're on the low end of the middle with the new rates. With our current rates, we're below the low end. But I let it go for a year. We didn't raise them last year. With us just coming out of COVID and with the employment issues, we decided to just let it go for a year. So that's why it looks like a substantial raise. It's usually between 200 and 250, 300 a year is what they go up. What that charge is what everybody gets that charge. So if you have private insurance, that's what your private insurance gets billed. If you are a Medicare patient, that's what we bill Medicare. Medicare pays a lot less. Private insurance generally pays the full amount. VA pays the full amount until recently. There's a new law that just got put in place by the federal government that would like to tie VA reimbursements to the Medicare rate instead of paying full rate. Really not a good thing, but it's in court right now. So so the rates would go up based on the level of care that's provided. The on-scene care base rates also reflect current billing rates. If I go out to 101 Frostwoods and we find a diabetic and we start an IV and we give them sugar and they don't want to go to the hospital, that would be your ALS on-scene care. Anything beyond just vitals. So if we do something to the patient, that would be an advanced lead. If that patient's on Medicare, that whole $750 or $1,000 is out the window. Medicare does not pay for on-scene care, neither does Medicaid. So these rates are specifically tailored towards insurance companies more than anything. So happy to answer questions.
The uninsured, how does this affect people? Is that an issue that you've seen?
Oh, yes, the self-pay bucket for us, to give you all a general idea, there's generally 4 buckets of money that we get reimbursed out of.
Okay.
The first and biggest is Medicare. In our community, our Medicare is about 65% of our transport. Medicaid in our community adds about 20% more. So 85% of our patients are Medicare and Medicaid. The private insurance accounts for about 12% here, and the remainder is considered self-pay or no insurance.
What's the math on it?
100%. So about
How many people?
How many are uninsured?
between 4 and 5%.
Okay.
And in the industry, again, just coming back from the billing conference, even the folks that came from the national law firm, it's considered the no pay bucket is what it's called, because it's very difficult to collect on folks that are don't have insurance. We do have a hardship program set up so they can apply for that and get it reduced, and most of them set up payments of $20 a month, $25 a month.
Do most people already know about this provision? Is that something?
It is part of the invoice that goes out to them.
Okay.
And we're a rare service that actually includes that information on the invoice, but if you're struggling to pay, there's a link right on there that they can click, and there's a process we've already got set up. Doesn't even come back to us. The billing company has criteria. And as long as they meet those criteria, we give them a set amount that they can reduce the bill for.
So it's a reduction, not a complete waiver.
No, we don't. We do not write bills off generally.
So you lose money on those deals.
100%.
Interesting. I mean, anyone should be able to get insurance, right? Is that not the case with Obamacare?
You have to pay
Yes.
something for it.
Depending on your situation.
Yeah.
Right, every situation's different and everybody can't afford it.
Oh, okay.
The opportunity exists for you to get insurance, but
Right.
you have to be able to afford it.
But you have to have a certain amount of skin in it. Okay. But then wouldn't Medicaid kick in?
Only if they're eligible.
Yeah, sometimes there's some donut holes that exist that it might
Okay.
not fit the criterias for Medicaid. And so then they're provided other option, but the option is too expensive.
Yeah, there were a lot of relaxed rules through COVID, so I expect our Medicaid rate percentages to actually drop next year. There were no, generally speaking, you have to recertify every 6 months or every year for Medicaid.
Mm,
And they suspended all those rules during the COVID emergency.
Okay,
So they didn't disenroll anybody regardless of whether they met the criteria or not.
oh,
But they are reinstituting those rules
right,
to disenroll people if they don't meet the criteria or if they haven't renewed their eligibility. So I expect those Medicaid numbers to drop by a few percent and the self-pay bucket to grow by a few percent.
Okay.
And I think one of your questions is roughly 4%. Roughly how many transports are in a year?
Transport wise, we transport, I'll just use a rough number, 1,000 people get transported. So
4%
yeah,
of
40
that.
or 50 people that are self-pay on any given. Because even the facilities that we transport from, most of those folks have Medicaid or Medicare or some version thereof. So if you talk like Tellurian, any of the assisted livings, any of the independent livings, generally speaking, they're all under the Medicare, Medicaid blanket. So the ones that we transport that are self-pay will generally be homeless folks that we have in the city
Mm,
that we end up having to transport. Those are generally the ones that are not under any umbrella, unfortunately.
Okay, well, that's a topic for further analysis, I'm sure.
But the other question that I know has come up over the years is one of the reasons that we've had with Verizon is this is not a bundled cost.
Correct.
We have an all part cost. So this is just the transport fee. Then there's the a la carte of like if you need
If you need an ID,
items,
yeah, or
you're
medication.
gonna build the items.
I can ask for.
Yes. Don't get an asker.
So what I can tell you about that is
That's
we
$40 right
we
there.
look at the bundled rates every year as well, because EMSC provides us with that as well. Their recommended rates for bundled rates, where you bundle all your supplies together, is north of $2,000. Which is most services do bundled. It's easier to do bundled. But the folks that generally need the most help have insurance of some point, of some type. And they will generally pay for supplies. So, that way we're not charging somebody $2,000 for ambulance transport, and all we did was pick them up and take vitals and take them to the hospital. They get the basic transport rate and no supply cost.
Okay.
And then miles are also billed separate.
All right, thank you.
That was one of the reasons why we didn't go bundle a number of years ago. That's help continue to do the best we can to keep costs low for individuals that are in self pocket. Any other questions or?
I'm just curious about the miles are added onto this.
Correct. $23 per loaded mile from where we start to where we drop them off at the ER. Medicare pays $8, I think, is what they pay for miles, and Medicaid will not pay mileage. Though they all get the bill, they choose not to pay. Federal government chooses not to pay under Medicaid.
It sounds like from the thing you talked about earlier, everybody's got to get a bill.
Yeah, everybody gets billed the same amount. Reimbursements are a whole different thing.
It's one of the reasons we went to a company. We used to do our own reimbursement.
And I remember we went to a 5-year contract.
Yes, EMS MC has been doing fabulous, so. From the reimbursement standpoint, when it comes to needing more information, there are new dashboards that we're gonna be getting access to, I think, next month. Literally, I can break it down by patient. Here's what, not only what we charged, but what was reimbursed, so I can actually say, here's what Medicare reimbursed for this patient, where we don't have that type of granular detail other than the buckets, so. The new dashboard is I can actually go in and see what they paid. Against that, or what the insurance company paid,
Oh, that's
co-pays, I can see all of that stuff on any given patient that EMSC does the billing for.
Oh, that's really convenient. That's great.
Yeah, because I think the fees come up in December at council.
So, if there are no questions, no further questions, we need a recommendation for the approval of the ambulance fees for a recommendation to the Finance and Personnel Committee.
I'll make that.
All right, we got a motion. Is there a second? And we have a second. Is there any further discussion? Any other questions?
I hate we have to do it, but I understand.
Yep.
Business is business is business.
Yeah, for us to be able to provide the service, we have to recoup some of the costs, but and it's getting more challenging to adjust some of it for local residents that are also paying in property taxes. That was one of the reasons why we did the resident, non-resident, but understand the difficulty with that, because we knew that residents were also paying property taxes that offset, but for what it's worth. All right, all those in favor say aye.
Hi.
Bye.
Right. Item has passed. We are
Thank you.
on to our two grants that were approved the other night, but to cover that, and the first item is discussion. Well, go ahead. First item is discussion action on the acceptance of the grant funding from Wisconsin DOT for safety OWI enforcement grant.
Good evening, thank you. So this is one of three grants that your police department receives from the Bureau of Transportation Safety. So just as a refresher, OWI grant, seatbelt grant, and then the speed grant. We'll be talking about two today. The speed grant is typically conducted during the warmer months, and so you'll see early next or mid, probably springish next year, you'll see we come before this body to ask for your approval and recommendation to council to accept the grant funding. So first up is the OWI grant. The reason that this is sort of going out of order and not going to you first, we're up against a little bit of a clock with the state and the county. Actually, we're trying to align ourselves with statewide and countywide campaigns for both of these, for OWI and seatbelt, which are going to be happening, especially the OWI one is going to be happening in around the December holidays. So we're going to try to get out early, often, and then combine with the sort of larger messaging that'll be taking place statewide. But the county is doing a bigger push for their campaign, county being all of us, and collecting the data and doing a lot of PR. And so I would hate for Monona not to be included in that campaign. So so my apologies that you all have seen this come to you first. We're kind of going out of order here, and that I had to get it to council so that we can get started. So, but I still am looking for your approval. In fact, the resolution at council mentioned that I was going to bring this to this body for their approval as well. So your vote is still very important. And so we're getting $7,500. That's down from what we've received in the past. Because we didn't utilize all the fundings in the past year. So the state said, we're gonna dock you a little bit and shrink down your grant amount. Some of the reasons for that is, we had a lot of forced and mandated overtime, and this is not forced overtime. We encourage and ask our officers to volunteer, they get paid time and a half, but to work these events. I don't compel them to work these grant events. We had, there were some other priorities last year, staffing wise, that we needed to schedule. So that's probably why we didn't meet that threshold. So instead of $10,000, we're receiving $7,500. The total pot for the task force, a group of municipalities that we're a part of that is a part of this grant, is $55,000. And so our cut of that is $7,500.
Any questions regarding the first grant?
Do you think now you have more interest from officers, things have settled, or are you still a little short staffed, or what's your?
No, we are fully staffed, and I am confident we're gonna get to the 7,500. Don't hold me to that. But we're in a much different situation. Now, we still have an officer who's deployed overseas, right? And it'll take her a little bit of time to get back into the routine of things, but I'm pretty confident that the officers we have now will sign up for these, especially the OWI grant. because it's such a passionate thing. I mean, seatbelt is too, don't get me wrong, but getting a drunk driver off the street, you know, is might be way more immediately impactful than somebody who wasn't wearing their seatbelt from the Pick and Save to, you know, the Quick Trip. So you still can die, still can have tragic results, but I think the OWI is piques more interest. So, and that's also when we schedule these too. We try to schedule them. We can't do it independently. We have to work with the rest of the task force and schedule the dates so that we coincide with the campaign on each of the dates that we conduct this. And so Lieutenant Weigel, who's on here, is our grant administrator for the entire group of municipalities. So he has the pleasure of coordinating all of that and collecting all the data and, you know, sending it off as well. So it gets a little tricky, but I think that we try to find dates and times that work well for most folks, that we can have enough volunteers. As you remember from your days in policing, typically before or after your shift versus coming in on an off day, on a weekend, right?
They're already. I got a couple more hours.
Yes, yeah.
I saw on the grant that there is an increased revenue that comes to the city through fines. Is that correct?
Kurt, do you have any more on that? Increased revenue on fines? I'm just not.
I noticed there was.
Any tickets you write.
Oh, sure, absolutely. The tickets
Yeah.
themselves.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah,
so
that'd be
there's an
issue.
increase in the number of fines.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Does
yes.
that offset the match to a sufficient degree?
Potentially. So the match, it depends on who's working. So the match is on duty time. So the officer is not getting time and a half as it relates to this grant. They're doing some straight time as we would consider it. And so it depends on how many tickets they write.
Yeah,
You know, will depend on if, you know, that number creeps up to the 20 or the $1,800.
Yeah.
So. There's, see, it's illegal for me to set a quota, so I don't do that. We do some strong encouragement. We encourage folks to focus on hazardous driving, obviously look for impaired driving. But they know that if they're on a grant, we expect productivity, the state does. And so you are likely to see several traffic stops during at least one of the Monona police grants when we're out there for big days. I can't necessarily speak for our colleagues, although Kurt's been doing a very good job of encouraging them / warning them the state's looking. And we all should be conducting stops and writing
okay,
tickets.
becomes a priority.
Yes. Versus the everyday, you know, OWIs aren't discretionary for us at our police agency. But you know, seatbelts certainly are. You don't necessarily have to write that ticket. You should be thinking about making a traffic stop. However, if it's a busy day and, you know, you've got 2 other calls holding, you know, there might not be an opportunity to make that traffic stop. You have to get that to that domestic instead, for example.
Yeah, I got caught in the drag.
Dragnet. That's been a while. Yeah.
Not that crap, like a speed
Not
trap,
like
like.
that. When you see task force, you think that there's some big, you know, cops are lined up. That's Madison. They set up more elaborate speed traps than we do.
They got lawn chairs.
Yeah.
Seriously.
They do. I've said, you probably.
I have-
Lawn chairs, how's
Yeah.
that? Why?
John Nolan Drive. Oh,
Instead of physical carving there's just an officer in a lawn chair
I see.
aiming with his
Okay.
LiDAR gun.
Packers Avenue on the
Yeah.
pedestrian
Yeah.
bridge, sit there in your
Yeah,
shorts
that's
and
another one.
t-shirt.
I wait that on 51.
Yeah, wow.
I'll see you later.
Yeah.
All right, so we need a motion on the first one, which is the OWI grant for an acceptance of the grant.
I'll make a motion for accept the grant.
All right, is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, you can take your pick. All right, any further discussion on the first grant? See none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? All right, OWI grant was complete. Item D, which is the grant, Wisconsin DOT, and this is for the seatbelt enforcement grant. Chief.
Again, Lieutenant Weigel helped me put some of these numbers together. The task force, the same group of municipalities, we received $60,000 as a group, and our share of that is $10,000. We have to commit the cost sharing, 25% is $2,500. So that's, again, with that, we have to commit some straight time dedicated to that cost sharing. So this will be focusing on seatbelt enforcement. However, as I mentioned to council and this group in previous meetings when this topic has come up, I'm primarily concerned with hazardous driving behavior. Seatbelts, although we can make that as a primary stop, I consider that secondary in nature is with respect to priority. The state and I, once they heard I made that mention of my focus on hazardous driving, no doubt a week later, they were in my office asking questions about, what do you mean you're not making stops for seatbelts? So that is not the case. We can still make stops for seatbelts, but I want, and I think you want, your officers focusing on the hazardous driving behavior. So that's what this is for. And it is, we typically get to this dollar amount. In fact, last year we went over by $800 that you all had to cough up and pay.
Any questions regarding this grant? Seeing none, the motion.
I'll move.
Right, in a second.
Second,
Perfect. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Right, that grant just passed. And item E, which is the discussion update on traffic issues and concerns around Monona Grove High School and other areas throughout the city. Chief.
Thank you. I'll be brief, and only because I want to, y'all to discuss and ask questions. I think this is an important topic to put on the agenda, especially as it relates to the student that was struck in front of Monona Grove High School. If you're not familiar, the student's doing okay, but was struck in a pedestrian crosswalk at Monona Grove High School at the release of class that happened on November 8th. The really frustrating part of that is that we quite literally had a patrol officer there minutes before doing enforcement and proactively trying to deter folks from violating that law of, yielding to pedestrians in a crosswalk. Hopefully several of you have seen, if not me, your officers out on Monona Drive in that block or just north or south of there, simply trying to put people on notice that we're out there paying attention and to please slow down. We have had a handful of complaints from residents who live on Wallace and Gordon related to some traffic behavior and hazardous driving. And so we've given that area some attention as well. I know the Public Works has given that attention as well. They have done, I think, a couple of traffic studies out there. I only have data from one that was shared, one of the earlier ones in September. And I'll tell you that every street in the city is a concern to me, right? And this police department about conducting patrols and doing radar and LiDAR with minus the lawn chairs. But we have a duty to make sure all of our roads are safe. I'm also very data driven as your chief. And I go where not only what the officers are seeing, where the complaints are sort of driving us to investigate, but also where the data of our crashes show things are happening. And so my goal is to make sure we don't have fatal crashes in this community, that everyone's safe that operates in our community. And with the resources that you wonderful people provide me, I sort of have to manage priorities and where I position those resources. So I am telling you, we spend, in my opinion, a good deal of time trying to address both the concerns of the neighborhood with respect to some what I'll consider maybe one or two troubled and not following the rules students who may be driving home from after school. I don't know if they're students I'm just guessing here. But we also have a major thoroughfare with students crossing Monona Drive that we have to pay attention to as well. So we spend a good deal of our time in and around that area. And so I just try to pull some data with some of the directed patrols that we conduct out there. And again, I wish we can do more. Give me more cops. Okay, and there is a thing called over policing too, right? And so just be aware of that. But we've conducted 72 directed patrols just in that 4400 block of Monona Drive. Directed patrol is when an officer is actively engaged in either traffic enforcement or some safety related enforcement activity in that area. And so they do what we call draw case numbers. They get on the radio, they say, I'm going to be out here doing traffic enforcement, or we can plug it in ourselves and self-assign, right? 72 of those have been in that 100 block. We've issued 88 citations. And we have, I'm sorry, not 88, 29 citations from as a result of those directed patrols. We issue a lot of warnings at my encouragement. I'm all about education and officers using their discretion and having passion and empathy, but 38 warnings as a result of 13 traffic complaints in that general area. So I say the 4400 block of Gordon, but I'm also tying in 4600 Wallace and 4400 Monona, but I'm also tying in 4600 Gordon and 4600 Wallace as well, where we also conduct a lot of these directed patrols. It is challenging for us to sit with a squad car on those side streets. Number one, we can't find a parking spot. And number two, it's a little bit challenging to get somebody going anything over 1 or 2 miles an hour over the speed limit, because by the time they round that corner, they already see us. So we're doing our job in deterring poor behavior, but we're not catching sort of some of the culprits that the neighbors are complaining about. We have been successful with the neighbors giving us descriptions and plate numbers, and have done follow-up and sent, called mom or dad, said, hey, we've received these complaints. And we think that that has been somewhat successful, but we're not talking, especially when my officers have been out there. I appreciate, I don't want to diminish the concerns of the neighbors that have raised these issues. But from our perspective, from my perspective, we're not seeing this drive a need to focus your efforts versus the Beltline or Monona Drive or Broadway or Winnequa. And so, as I mentioned to the mayor, unless I'm told otherwise, I'm going to continue to try to patrol that area, try to be a deterrence, try to write some tickets, do some education with the school that the school resource officer is doing. But we also have these other priority areas. Just by way of example, I know I said let's talk long about this, but here I go. By way of an example, based on the complaints, and I've tried to be receptive to this. I assigned, and with Lieutenant's help, a special initiative where we had officers working both on duty and off duty, working a traffic initiative in that area, just to let's blanket the area and help educate folks. So for 2.5 hours, post school and at the lunch hour recess, we conducted 15 traffic stops, 2 parking citations. Parking is a whole nother issue that will probably result in a full meeting if the group wants to discuss that. 4 citations to include no driver's license, failing to yield, no proof of insurance, illegal tip. Your chief himself even made a traffic stop out there. 9 traffic warnings were issued. Most of them were on Monona Drive for speeding. Right. Again, we're kind of drawn to that area of Monona Drive versus what we're seeing in the neighborhoods of Gordon and Wallace. And then things like this come at a cost. So I lay that out to the mayor and you folks. We talk about money as well, especially the alders in the room. That costs us over time $233, which you're thinking that's not bad. Well, if you do that every day, it starts to add up. And then total employee cost was about 693. So that's the on-duty personnel that we had dedicated to that, and then the overtime costs. With the total citation amounts, Lieutenant Weigel helped me do the math on this. The citation portion, not reduced by the judge, that the city received or potentially could receive, is $180. It doesn't necessarily offset, but we came close to that. So that's not me saying that we can't do more. I'm saying that with the resources that we have, I think we're doing the best we can. But I want to make sure that residents know that we're here. My door is always open. I haven't had somebody come to me directly and say, Chief, can we meet to discuss this? I'm happy to do it. And you don't necessarily have to meet with me. You can meet with one of my officers if you're more comfortable doing that. But I tell you, Taniwatha, those of you wonderful residents that live there, you complain to me as well. Certainly Winnequa, you have me on direct speed dial, and Falcon Circle and Broadway. So we're doing what we can. So I'm open to any suggestions or any advice or any questions.
Like you said, this would be a much longer discussion, but there has to be some kind of traffic demand reduction model in terms of how many kids should be allowed to drive their car to school.
Right.
Well, hang on, that would not be the purview of this group.
Not this group. Oh, I understand that, but I'm just saying that obviously other avenues have to be pursued. In terms of trying to reduce the amount of traffic. I think some level of inspection should be done on that level. Since it is a safety issue and it's a police issue in terms of overtime.
Do you
Well,
feel
then it
your office? Go ahead.
I'm
Angela.
sorry, but then it becomes a little judgmental. We can't assume why all the kids are driving to school or what their situations are at home. Maybe they need to drive to school, or maybe they are giving rides to other kids. I just want to be careful that we're not being judgmental.
So that's, can I opine on that? That is somewhat, I'm trying to be very sensitive about too, Angela. Thank you for bringing that up, because we respond daily probably to complaints about parking in those blocks of Wallace and Gordon, and our officers are proactively daily out there enforcing it. And we actually have, you know, some plans in the works to allow our crossing guard to potentially go out there and do some warning level enforcement out there. Not, you all haven't authorized them to write tickets yet, but we're trying to just be creative in our approach. But also the educational component we're doing too with the SRO. Thank goodness we still have that connection in our school, because he's got wonderful relationships and is discussing this issue regularly. Herein lies the issue. You have a new set of students and drivers like regularly that come into the school. So any semester is a new group of new 16-year-olds who are driving to school. And you know, we were all kids once. I will tell you, thank goodness I didn't record all of my driving activity at 16 years old. You know, I've made some poor decisions. My brain wasn't fully developed yet. And so that's what we're seeing out there, is, you know, some silly driving, some goofiness, but nothing that I have found, or my officers have found, to be quite as reckless as some of the other driving that we're seeing around town. They are, for the most part, when you tap them on their shoulder and when the SRO contacts them and says, move your car before we ticket it, we get compliance. It's when there's a lot of follow the leader happening out there, where you get one or two cars parking on the wrong side of the street and there's no other cars parked on the opposite side of the street. It's follow the leader. So now you have 8 cars parked on the wrong side of the street, and then the other kids who are awake and paying attention when they get to school actually see that, oh, those cars are all wrong. I need to park on this side. And now you have both sides of the street that are, you know, with cars. What do you do? Right? So we try to be compassionate about that issue too, is that, you know, these are $30 tickets a pop, and, you know, do we start towing cars potentially? I mean, it's sort of a slippery slope that I think is, I'm happy to give input and give data and tell you what I think. I haven't found the solution. And in talking to my staff, who says that this has been an issue since that high school has been there, to their knowledge, or at least when they started 20 something years ago, there hasn't been a good solution to some of the parking issues. What the high school should, I think, has tried to do in the past, is what I'm told, is add more parking. But that is restricted by the city of Madison, because they're literally surrounded by the city of Madison and some of the lots that they use, including the tennis court area, which that's a whole nother topic, is what that community feels about that high school. I mean, they literally have a gate barring driving even from police vehicles. I mean, we have a radio channel, but we're ramming that gate if we have to get through, because of how slow it opens. It takes an act of, I don't want to say council because I don't want to overstep, but it takes a lot of people involved to get that gate to open. Say, for example, the Memorial Day parade. I couldn't get that gate to open. Like, I couldn't get the authorization to get that gate to open. So that's just how strongly that neighborhood feels about Monona Grove students and parking, and I don't want that to become us.
I didn't mean to open a can of worms, but it's kind of where my mind went when you talk about it.
Chief,
Yes, sir.
we drive through the school zone every day on the way to babysit our granddaughter.
Yeah.
It makes a big difference if you have a squad parked in that driveway across the street from the school, or if an officer is handing out a citation or a warning. And I have to say, it's mostly commuters and not just students. I know there are a few students in there, but it's people going to work. And sometimes we've seen people go through they've got the crosswalk lights there. We've seen people ignore that. But you can't have an officer there 100% of the time. Because other stuff is happening.
You're right, and sometimes in the case of the officer that, you know, left there 6 minutes or 8 minutes prior to that crash happening, I mean, that officer, you know, debriefed with somebody after that because they felt horrible, you know, that a student got struck. Now, I will say, I'll give you some details. You're right in that there's a lot of non-student, you know, activity out there with poor drivers. In that particular case of the pedestrian versus car crash, it was a Monona Grove student crossing in the crosswalk lawfully, and the second lane, so one car stopped in one lane.
Yeah.
The second lane, a La Follette High School student was driving inattentively and struck the Monona Grove student. Fortunately, they're doing okay. So
And this was in the crosswalk?
in the crosswalk, so one lane stops, yields for student that's walking through the crosswalk. That second inner lane, we call that the number one lane by the median. That driver continued on and did not see because they were driving inattentively.
I would have to think with your officers too, not everything's captured here, is that if you're just on patrol, you're gonna slide by if you have some time and you're not gonna draw a case number and stuff, so you actually have more coverage than what you're saying.
Right, so this is on my way to work too.
Yeah.
Driving through there, and I don't generate a case number,
Yeah.
right? Or when I'm going to pick up food or I'm on a meeting, I don't generate a case number, but I make sure you know. I can't tell you how many times my siren has been activated, warning people to slow down, or my lights have flashed. I drive an unmarked car, and probably those of you on this committee should know what it looks like, but you'd be surprised at how many people don't realize that, oh, that's a police car. And they just sort of cruise right past me. So you're right. The amount of proactive activity that happens, we can't necessarily account for because we're not drawing case numbers with, you know.
It's just more than this. I would bet you'd be confident in saying that. That's
I-
all my
you're-
point.
Thank you for pointing that out. Absolutely. Yeah.
And some of what this was to bring up, not only in this area, but we also have other areas, like you mentioned a few of those, where there's actually same level, if not increased levels of complaints regarding hazardous driving,
Yes.
other than the high school, are actually, this area around the high school overall is not nearly as a big issue as other areas of our city when it comes to hazardous driving.
There's both sides of the road, Monona, all the way through to what?
It's there's a stretch between Plum and
Dean.
Dean that's the city.
By
Yes,
the golf course then,
correct.
right? Okay,
Correct.
but then it's all Monona to Cottage Grove Road.
Kind of zigzagged a little bit, but
So
no,
the quick trip is Madison, the strip mall on the east side of the.
Correct.
Madison.
correct.
That's way too common.
Yeah.
The church on the
Like-
east side of the road is Madison up to, was that Buckeye?
Yeah, Buckeye Lake Edge.
Lake Edge, that's all Madison. But just in how, and have I seen a Madison officer? out
I'm
there?
sorry, I was getting at, I know-
Zero time.
I've not seen some of my former colleagues out there, not saying they're not doing it, I just.
They're just taking the big calls.
Yes, I've not seen them sharing the road and responsibility of policing that road. But, you know, I will say that, you know, it's called Monona Drive. We're happy to take some ownership of that and do our part.
But some of it is shared.
Jurisdictionally, the state changed that law several years ago, which makes it, even though the other side of the road is Madison, because we share the road, we can enforce the laws on that side of the road.
Which probably proves more beneficial on Broadway.
Yes, well. In what sense? Oh, towards
Southtown.
yes, Southtown, yes,
The Southtown area.
right, we sit in that little nook often, right before the Beltline there.
All right, there wasn't any expectation for any action on this. This is really more for some information being brought forward because there tends to be sometimes side conversation of, hey, did you hear about that accident, or did you hear about the thing that happened up at high school? Which was a very difficult thing to kind of see and read about and hear about. And at the same time, outside of that one incident, the data is really supporting the continued enforcement that we have in place and not necessarily requesting any additional resources or detracting from anywhere else at this time.
Well said.
I don't know if you send this out at all with the date on the bottom. Is,
Which, on which date?
it says January 1st, 2003 to November 8th, 2003.
Yeah, we'll make a.
I just saying, it's gonna be sent out somewhere or whatever.
Oh, it was.
Oh, yeah.
Gotta give people something to comment
Yeah.
about. Go put an error in there, what do we got? All right, any other last points or questions or requests for kind of further discussion either on this specific topic or other topics kind of related to the traffic aspect that people have? And we can go on to item 6F, which is the discussion on Spanish language courses for police, fire, EMS, and dispatch. And Alder, I'll let you kind of kick this off. If that's
Okay. Well, I guess I've talked to Chief Cheney a couple times, or I've heard him talk about this a couple times, and so that's what triggered my interest in following up and seeing what the potential is for having our officers, both police and fire, EMS and dispatch, learn to speak Spanish. So I'm sure you're got thoughts on the matter, so I'll just leave it with you.
Yeah, and I know the chief and I have talked about this as well. Yeah, I am one of the only, I will say conversationally, you don't want me to write an essay. So, you don't want me to write an essay in English. You hired me, but conversationally fluent in the Spanish language officers in the department. I'm the only one. And that includes our dispatchers. Now, we do have a municipal clerk that is able to speak Spanish. He speaks Spanish. But if nobody is here, if either one of us are here, and which is often the case anyway, even when I am here, because I'm meeting with residents or at meetings, we utilize a service called Language Line. Same one, Mark, when you were an officer. And that is a service that you pick up a phone, you have an account number, they charge you by the minute, and I, in my career, have not found a language they could not find an interpreter for, which is amazing. It's a wonderful service. But that is sort of a game of telephone, right? So you have to somehow, get the person on the phone and, figure out how to transfer the call or get a conference call. And if that person's physically present, it's a game of handing off the phone or using speakerphone. That creates some complexities, not only in terms of just comfort level in communicating with somebody, but also legally speaking. Oftentimes these individuals who work for the company aren't necessarily either in this state, they might not be in this country. And so when you're utilizing that service for a criminal case, for example, it is hearsay in the case of a criminal trial and proceeding to say, the interpreter told me that. It's got to be a direct witness account. So the interpreter oftentimes, I've been subpoenaed before for assisting with OWI cases in Spanish translation. And I've been, grilled on the sand, so to speak, with respect to my Spanish skills and what I exactly said and interpreted. We don't have that ability when using Language Line. And so, I would venture to say that a lot of those cases are pled out or sometimes even dismissed, or we run into some issues with those cases in which we use Language Line. For the most part, we use it just to get sort of a summary of what's happening. And if it's a significant case, like say a domestic violence case or sexual assault case, for example, we try to reach out to see if Madison has that resource, and we request mutual aid for a Spanish speaker at Madison, but they're busy too. I mean, there's not a day go by that they're not on priority calls, which means they only go to the most severe stuff during that time frame because they're so busy. So the thought process is, geez, it would be great if some of our staff, our dispatchers and our officers could have a basic conversational Spanish skill. Not fluency, but just basic conversational skill that they're able to comfortably communicate with somebody at a 5th grade level, right? And get the basics and get the gist of what happened and establish probable cause because they know enough vocabulary and are able to speak sufficiently enough. Can they write a novel? No. Can I write a novel? No. But I am comfortable probably more at a level that I expect our officers to be just conversationally talking and doing interviews, for example, in Spanish. Learn the basics, learn how to give basic information to a victim. Again, right now we use a language line or some translated paperwork to which we don't have a lot in either Spanish or Hmong for that matter. But it would be beneficial for us to have on staff additional folks who can speak Spanish. Now, I've received a couple of officers and sort of and one dispatcher who have sort of said, hey, would you be interested in because it's extra time of their day and it's an extra skill. And so they have to have the desire to do that and then keep up with that. Because it's like me, I used to speak nothing but Spanish until I went to kindergarten. My mom says, ja, no más, no more Spanish in the household, no more, because I was having trouble with English. But I lost so much of it. And every time I go out of country, this is why I choose to go to South America often, it's right back, right? Because I'm immersed in it. And when you don't lose it or use it, you lose it, you know, and that includes those, you know, like me who learned Spanish first before English. So it's a little tricky. So I think there's some desire there. I haven't taken a survey yet with my officers to say who would be interested. I think we'd want to know what's involved. The officers would. How big of a commitment is this? And is there, other than doing good and helping residents or just members of the public, where's the other carrot? What's the other incentive for me gaining this extra skill set? Is it monetary? Is it days off? What's the additional carrot? And so I think that needs to be discussed too.
And there's also when a police officer is stopping someone for a traffic stop or what have you, there's a good chance that it could be someone who's a Spanish speaking individual.
The officers are really good at saying a handful of words. Licencia, aseguranza, which means insurance, manejando, which means driving. So I think they, based on their just general experience, have learned a handful of Spanish words to be able to get by through a traffic stop. Okay. But to explain, you know, I stopped you for lane deviation and violating a red light, we got a problem, potentially. Right. I have a feeling that officers are using Google Translate on their smart devices to help get them through some of that. Okay. But for criminal matters, and Mark used to be a detective for years, that's not going to fly.
Well, they would have people, I asked the 6 or 7 year old child who's bilingual to interpret a domestic violence case, and right away there's problems there.
Re-traumatizing the child.
Yeah, right.
But I don't know, I remember Dan Roman would do some training, but he do an in-service class, which was great now to hands up some police things that you'd have to say right away. But again, if you don't do it, you might have your cheat sheet in your squad box, but it's really hard unless you want to immerse yourself in how our pain went for a 3 months somewhere to.
So I think that's worth exploring. I'm not sending money off to Costa Rica for 3 months, but I think we ought. Supervision. Might be the cheap to go. But I mean, in terms of like, let's make sure if we make this investment and we have an employee who's willing to learn the language, let's do it right. And let's make sure that there's some version of ongoing or continuous learning outside of the classroom that we can provide them. You know, maybe, we say, hey, this night, we have a family that has adopted cops, for Spanish lessons, and say, hey, these, 3 nights a month, you're going to go to dinner, or you're going to go to a picnic, and we're going to compensate you for that, just so that they have that immersion.
With something like I don't know Spanish, but Amigos Azul or something like that.
Friends in Blue, yeah.
Could they maybe partner with Madison if they have events to kind of show up, because now I don't know, that was just
Yeah, and I
I'm
think
not sure
that,
how that-
I think the challenge, great idea, the challenge with that is that I have so few staff and I have a roster to make sure I.
Oh, yeah,
use
no, I
that.
was just saying for different
Yes.
connections, so people who wanna be connected, some of
Yeah.
the. Community service type things your officers do or whatever, like, that was just a thing that's already established, so.
Right, you'd be, so, Amigos, they've grown a lot. I think what I found the last Amigos event I went to is that, you know, there was one or three of us that spoke Spanish, and the balance of those officers were just, you know, trying to help out and were engaging that community and weren't necessarily speaking in Spanish. And I don't know why, maybe they didn't know, or maybe they were just not comfortable. I wanna throw our officers in the deep end once they've got the classroom, you know, down. Because you're not gonna learn, or you're not gonna build on your skills if you don't immerse yourself in the language. I speak a lot of Spanglish and I'm like, thank God, you know, but it's not good. It's not good for me in keeping up with my skills, and I can't rely on that when I go to South America.
Is there a chance with the new hire for a dispatcher that you could find someone who has Spanish language skills?
If they apply, so I think that we've got, I mean, and that all goes to how much recruitment budget we get, and you know, where we do our outreach, and you know, giving us the resources and time to do that outreach to, but we've had, you know, there's fewer and fewer people who, unfortunately, this is a great job, the best job in the world, but fewer and fewer applicants that want to do this sort of job or in public service, sector jobs, such as, police and fire. So we struggle with that just for officers.
Okay.
But that's not to say we can't do more, it's worth exploring. Do we put something in La Movida, for example? Do I go and talk to Conectivo or something? You know, there's options there. But we also need to make sure that they are qualified to do the job. And in terms of police, one of our biggest barriers is the state requires that they be United States residents.
Interesting, okay. I gotcha.
Citizens.
Well, what can we do to help? Is there something either as alders or as this committee we can furnish you to make it possible to take the next step?
I think what I'd like to do is sort of, once we get through our contract season here, is sort of, because that's a whole different beast, is try to stir up interest and engage interest, right? Like, you know, have individual meetings and say, hey, this would be really great if, this would really help us out if, this would help you out if, and try to motivate people to want to learn Spanish. And then figure out what the common theme would be for that carrot, other than personal, you know, gain and doing the right thing. I don't do this job just for doing the right thing. You all pay me quite well, so thank you for that. But that, you know, they're gonna want something in terms of that as well.
Well, yeah, even
Yeah.
if it's financial incentive,
Yes.
then
Yeah.
we need to hear what you think will work.
Yeah, so let me do, my request is let me do some research, but I think we all also need to mirror that with, you know, and how the city operates is, you know, if we do the police, we do the fire, et cetera. We also need to see what the chief and I need to work together on that. Because he has, I think, life safety needs, with respect to why your paramedics might need to speak Spanish or want to learn Spanish.
It's my sense that there's a growing community of Spanish only speakers in Monona. And that, I mean, I go to the UW Credit Union and half the people who walk up to the counter.
Are Spanish speaking?
So it's not as well known. I mean, there used to be a Mexican restaurant on Monona Drive, and that was just like only. Do you know the one?
There's La Rosita
Yeah.
still.
No, this was another
oh.
one where the Jamaican place is now.
Oh, right,
Las Alas or something. It had seafood, Mexican seafood.
which I don't eat seafood, so I probably have.
That's
been there.
Madison.
Um,
It was in Madison, but it's surrounded by.
Yeah.
It's the other Hillburger. Well, I said my piece, I guess.
It's good.
Maybe we should hear from the fire chief.
He's actually done very well.
Okay.
I will have to gauge if there's interest in it. It's probably the biggest thing. Because from a time commitment standpoint, there's no way it can happen on duty. I'm having to pay overtime just to get inspections done.
Right.
So from a time commitment standpoint, it's just not gonna happen. So for people to be willing to do it off duty. There will definitely have to be a carrot, but it also has to be people who are willing to not only do it, but use it.
Yeah,
And we do run into quite a few that are,
do you, on those,
Yeah.
100 calls a day? 100 calls a month?
I mean, and fire goes to all our, injury, crashes on the belt line and, think of all the Spanish speakers on the belt line, potentially Spanish only speakers. So, I mean, I don't know how to say acetaminophen. Acetyl Tylenol, like, that's the Spanglish, when the Spanglish comes in, I probably knew it, at one point, I don't know, but. I mean, I'm just thinking in terms of, do you have high
Yeah,
blood pressure
medical
issues? Do you have-
terms,
And I've helped fire out with translation as well when I've been out and about, so.
I mean, we just had the accident on the belt line last month. I mean, it was a car full of Spanish speakers.
Right.
And and there was no Spanish speaking officers available.
Yeah.
They trying to get them to understand. What we needed to check out on them was difficult at best. Not actually possible. So,
So do you need a mechanism then, Jerry?
so we use the language line.
Do you? Okay.
Yeah,
Oh, you can use that out in the field?
but
Oh, wow.
we've got a program into the squad phones and, but again, it's. As Dan would say, telephone, telefirefighter kind of thing, you're passing it back and forth, and there's a lot that gets lost in translation. Our folks have tried to use Google Translate, usually what it translates into. Half the time, they actually start laughing, because whatever you're asking them, there's no bearing on what you're trying to ask them. And then when they respond back, what it translates it to is individually related to what you asked them, so. Yeah,
I think both of us are trying our best to actively recruit a diverse workforce.
Right,
And part of that obviously is, we would love people who have Spanish speaking skills, and I believe. Kurt, if you're still listening, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we did have maybe somebody who potentially spoke Spanish. I know for sure I had an intern, a potential intern this year who was Spanish speaking. Kurt, did we have a potentially Spanish speaking applicant this year, do you recall?
For patrol?
Yeah,
Yeah, I believe there was.
okay, that didn't sort of make the threshold, right? And just, in terms of the intern applicant I had too, this same thing, like. You're getting there, you're just not there yet, and so we need to do just better job of mentoring and figure out, how we would do to.
on a positive note, I do have a new volunteer application who is fluent in Hebrew.
whoa,
So on a positive
Yeah.
note, we are getting some unique
Wow.
applicants, so.
Even our Brazilian American officer, I think, lost a good deal of his Brazilian Portuguese after years and years and years of not using it, so.
okay, well, maybe you could report back to us if you
Okay. Yes, thank you.
have some additional information.
And I don't think either of you were here when previously we had a physical fitness piece connected, so
We were here, I was here.
right, yeah. So there was this period of time of, if you could do this certain test, you got a bonus.
Right.
I don't know how that panned out with negotiations over the years.
It was still happening, and it was a cut from the budget during sort of budget cycles. And what would happen is that we'd have fewer and fewer people that participated in that physical fitness assessment. And so they shared the pot, however many people qualified and met the standard twice a year, they'd have to test out. And then if you did it twice a year, you'd share that, I think it was $2,000 or
Yeah.
something like that. And so, of course, you were hoping you were the only one. That
You made everybody else sick.
Yeah.
You all got the flu.
Yeah. Yeah, and so it ended up being like 4 or 5 at the end of the year, and we're switching gears now. There's another wellness and mental mindfulness incentive that we're doing, and we're giving time off instead.
Oh, there you go.
So I don't know if that'll work for Spanish.
Well, time off comes with coverage pay.
Yeah,
So
well,
remember, I mean, it's still,
our time off, how we organize it is, it's gotta be mutually agreed upon time. It's not like vacation. But yes, it's if we have an extra body, then they can take the time.
Well, it sounds like there's some options to pursue.
Well, now that I said a trip to Costa Rica, I guarantee you that that's what
No, that
they're gonna listen in and say,
Yeah.
yeah.
Or after Guadalajara first.
But one of the things that we might consider is rather than having it be a pot that is divided up. I mean, the desire of the council back then was we wanted to know what the dollar value was. Versus the idea of like, if you pass some assessment, you got a fixed amount, like, who cares if it's 1 or 20? On the city side, we had to then budget for the 20, but.
Yeah.
That would then need to be something that we're prepared to kind of add in. On the bigger scheme of things, which would be great.
Some Madison, well, Madison went away from this. Some municipalities offered a sort of an increase in your pay,
Yeah.
your salary for having that, skill. And it'd be like a proficiency test getting in, but I don't think there was ongoing proficiency test. And again, if you don't use it, you kind of lose it. So that might be something that.
Well, it's just something I got pushback from a lot of other officers was what other skills you can have, you've got these very highly skilled people in ERT with SWAT skills,
Correct,
computer skills.
correct.
So why am I not getting an increase?
Mhm.
Spanish speaking is important, but so is my skill.
Yeah, right.
One of the things I always kind of went back, if you got hired, but that's one of the reasons you got hired, is because you had that ability. I got hired because I was tall. I could look over things and I can get any extra for that.
Yeah, you didn't expect extra pay every year.
But I mean, not to diminish the importance of
You're right.
second language, because it's incredibly important. But that might open the door to other people saying, well, hey, what about me thing? I've got this skill that I get called away for. Okay, I don't know if the K-9 officers get a bump in pay. They got a nice, yeah, so, yeah.
Yeah. That's a big can of worms. Yeah.
Yeah, and I know that's a huge issue that needs to work, but I mean, that's just something that also goes along with that when you talk about extra pay.
Currently, the only police position that gets paid anything more is the school resource officer. God bless them. So,
Worth every dime.
the non-promoted position.
It's interesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Awesome. All right, and. Item 7, is any updates, discussion on diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives and efforts, anything from the chiefs?
From a diversity standpoint, our last group of volunteers, I think we have, we brought on 3 Hispanic young men, along with 3 more women. We have another, it would be part of my other update, but we have got another cohort of, I think, 10 volunteers starting in January. Young lady that speaks Hebrew will be one of those. We have I'm a firm believer in second chances. We had a young African American male apply, has a bit of a checkered past. So he was passed over on the background check portion of it, but my assistant chief and I have been through that very thoroughly. He was very interested in when he came in, sat down. We did a second background check on him, and despite the initial background check, we're going to bring him on in January as well. Very excited young man, lives on Winona Way. So we're reaching a different audience, which is good. The side effect of these new volunteers, and Brian's already heard this, so one of the issues that we are running into, we don't have a lack of volunteers. I've got 25 applicants for this next group. The problem we're running into is we have a lot of new volunteers. We have very few engine operators. Most of them are 60 years old or older. And if I got nobody to operate the truck, I got a bunch of volunteers sitting in the station doing nothing if a call comes in. We're doing our best to try and encourage them to continue moving forward and get their pump operator certification, but if there's like not a third full-time member on that can drive the engine, I have 2, 3, 4 volunteers coming down that can't do it. They sit at the station. So that's one of the side effects. The 10 volunteers we'll bring on in January will be the last group we bring on for a while, because we're simply out of room. We'll be at close to 50 volunteers at that point. And again, they're very involved. A lot of our new folks are pulling a lot of hours. But again, without people to drive the trucks, they're sitting in the station. We're driving one of our smaller vehicles to scene where I don't have an engine to work at a scene. So there's a balance. We've lost a lot of older volunteers. We had a big group of volunteers that had 15, 20 years on, and almost all of them are retired at this point, with the exception of Dan Eckloff.
Bless his heart.
Between Dan and Bob, they've each got 45 years on the department. Other than that, most of my officers have been there 7 years or less. And volunteer wise, our average age volunteer wise is less than 3 years. So there's a lot of experience that is retired, and it's just not, you can't replace that overnight, unfortunately.
No.
Chief,
Yes, sir.
what are the requirements for pump operators now?
Willingness to go through class. So that is the biggest hurdle. So
To go through what?
willingness for them to actually take the class.
And how long is that class? What's,
Pump operators 36 hours, but they have to be Fire 1 at a minimum, which means they have to put in 66 hours through entry level, and then go get Fire 1, which is another 36 hours plus 20 hours of hazmat training before they're even allowed to apply for pump operator. And that's I spoke wrong, that's a 66-hour class for pump operator. And it reflects the change in volunteers. It's very hard to get them to commit to go Wednesday night for 4 hours for 12 weeks.
Right.
And still come to trainings on Tuesday night, and still respond to calls, and still give up 4 Saturdays during that time period for driving practice.
This is for a volunteer.
Yes. So that's the difficult part, Larry, is getting people to have the time to take the class.
Mhm.
We were gonna host a class this fall. We had several people that were very interested. Out of the 6 that wanted to sign up, I got 2 that could actually make it work. And those 2 were really interested, and we got them in the class, but we had to cancel the class here because we didn't have enough people. And instead, they had to now travel to Columbus to take that class. And thankfully, they're both very dedicated new volunteers. They're almost done with class. They got 3 more weeks. But again, it's getting the time commitment. It's very difficult for people to commit the time to get the certifications needed to even go to the class. And we have a lot of volunteers that are still freaked out at the size of the trucks. They have no interest in driving something that's 40 feet long and has this much room on each side of the garage door to get out. They have no interest in driving it. Luckily, the two that are going to class are interested in going to aerial operator. Because we have even fewer of those. I think we have 4 that can operate the ladder. 5 if you count me, but
Chief, I think it's great that you'll have a young African-American male that wants to be a volunteer. I think that is wonderful. I don't want to be negative Nancy here, but it threw me a little when you said he had a checkered past, because he's going to stand out. This is a public meeting, and then everybody knows he has a checkered past. So I just want to be, I just want to be careful.
Yeah, I understand your concerns. He brought it up to the group as a whole himself. The fire department's already aware.
Right, and that's good, and that shows maturity. But I just want to be careful in the way we internally talk about that, because others will pick up on that and talk about it that way too. We don't want it's a stigma. We all have a past. If we all think about the things we've done, it's by the grace of God, none of us, all of us can pass a background check. I just want to be mindful of the way we talk about folks that have been through some things.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Point. Was he applying for a volunteer position?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
That's all I got for that update.
And
Just let me say, things have really changed in terms of requirements. When I was hired by the fire department some decades ago, I was hired as a driver. The person who drove the truck to the scene and operated the pump. The key question they asked me was, can you drive stick shift? Then I had 2 days of training with one of the other guys, and we drove around Monona. And every 200 yards, stop the truck, put it in pump, take it out, drive 200 yards, do that. Did that for 2 days, and then I was on shift. And-
Unfortunately, Larry, stick shift is a foreign language for a lot of people nowadays. So.
No,
And anti-car theft devices.
but you know, it's amazing how much the standards have improved. And the people that we're putting out there on the street in a dangerous profession are much more qualified than when I started. So in a way it's a barrier, but in a way it's very good, because it's dangerous work. Law enforcement, dangerous work. And the world has changed. So I wish you the best of luck with getting some pump operators. I'm not applying.
We can create a driver position for you, Larry.
I don't know that they grandfather you though.
Yeah, hire me under the grandfather clause.
I think the only thing I'll say on the topic, DEI and belonging, relates to just the ongoing community engagement that the police department does, that I do. One of the wonderful, speaking of volunteers, one of our volunteers, who's actually a Monona resident, right? Is also an educator at Memorial High School in the city. And I enthusiastically agreed to do to attend class. He teaches a forensic science class, and which I think is amazing that high school level has a forensic sciences class. I would have loved something like that as somebody interested in policing. But so I presented for 6 sessions, and it went really well. The reason I bring that up is because that was a extremely diverse group of students. Some English as a second, many English as a second language, and the thank you cards, like 3 of them that I received today from all of the students was really heartwarming. But it also is sort of encouraging me to do what we're doing and a lot of the outreach and community engagement that we're doing, not only for Monona residents, but also people who know Monona, who shop in Monona, who drive through Monona. That impacts more the things we do in this committee, and the chief and I, and the people we are lucky to lead, do way more for, or just as much for the residents of Monona as we do for everyone else, the visitors, the shoppers, the commuters. And so everyone knew Monona. They all heard about 1 or 2 of our police chases, but they really, I think, were engaged with. So you know how I by now I'm just sort of informal, just like ask away, and if I can answer it, I'll answer it. So we spent about 10 minutes talking about everything that is on my vest, which I got a lot of thank yous for too. But a lot of the conversation was just about police operations and what we do and how we interact with people and why we do things. And a couple of the notes that I got in the thank you cards were, I'm thinking of being a police officer.
Wow.
Right. And so that's like, all it took was a day. And I would not be here were it not for a Chicago cop that I interacted with. That was a very positive experience after all the very not so good positive experiences. So we're just going to keep doing things like that, both in Monona and outside of Monona. Because I get these questions, Chief. I see you, going to these fireside 5-0s and at Penny Library in Madison, or I see you on this side of town in Madison. Aren't you a Monona cop? I'm a cop in this community, right? But everything I do is just for all of our safety. What happens across the street impacts all of you guys and girls. What happens in Monona, you know, impacts the Madison residents as well. So I think that that's something that I know the chief does on his end too, and will continue to do with respect to our obligations to make this, you know, to put more effort with respect to DEIB.
Were there any girls in that class?
There were some young ladies in that class, yes. Did you happen to have a couple people in that course, or did I keep referring to people as guys? Is that what I'm doing wrong? Probably. Yeah, I'll work on that. It's one of my many flaws.
It was at Memorial,
Memorial, yeah,
no SRO.
with no SRO. So surprisingly enough, or not surprising, the assistant principal came out to me during the lunch break. I'm working in my squad car, getting, you know, real work
They're
done,
like,
I
oh,
should say.
great, what are we?
And yes, I was confronted by the assistant principal, who was very pleasant. Who said that, you know, you have a lot of kids asking what you're doing here, because they're just not used to seeing, number one, a squad car parked out there. And number two, a full uniformed police officer. These kids, you know, don't have that history, because Madison had removed its SRO 3 years ago, or 4 years ago. Yeah,
From all its schools?
from all of its schools. I don't get questioned. I get waves when I go on a Grove. Chief's here.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Which is good. That says something about that relationship that our SRO and the police department has, yeah.
Any others have items to share regarding DEIB initiatives? I know there's a listening session coming up on the 30th, if I have the date memorized correctly. 28th. Or is it the 28th?
Almost 30.
We'll find out here in a second.
30th at 7 p.m.
I had 6 on my
I
mind.
think.
6, yeah, I think it's 6.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think
Okay.
Teresa corrected that.
Yeah, I think it's 6.
Yeah, the 30th makes sense, because that's a Thursday. Thursday, the 30th at 6 o'clock, and I believe it's in the lower level of the library room. And that will be a presentation by the DEIB group, the implementation group, who is taking forward the report that was generated from the first group to then look at what are some actual strategies that can be implemented both at the city level as well as at the community level. So it's a listening session, so please join us if you can. It's an opportunity to hear what that group has been doing, but also to add in some additional input into those efforts.
My wife is on that committee. And they've been doing a lot of work. She's been doing a lot of research and a lot of writing, and they've had a lot of meetings and working with Nehemiah
Wonderful.
on this. Yeah.
And do we have the right date and time, Larry?
Right, that's a good question.
I don't know, because you might.
All right. I think so. I just shot at it. I wrote it down on my calendar. I thought Mary Ann might be in the background. No?
No, she's
My
upstairs.
email says.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. But if all else fails, check the city website and you'll be sure be there on the right night. So we'll move on to reports, which we can start with any highlights, fire report.
I will be brief.
Yeah, good luck.
I already talked about the new volunteers that we got coming on board. We did promote 2 officers. We had a captain retire, Captain Lockwood retired after 19 years. We promoted one of our lieutenants up to captain. We just had a process to give you an idea of how young the department is to be able to get to even a fire officer level. We had 1 candidate that was not already an officer. Other than full-time staff, which we have several that qualify, but from the volunteer side, we had 1, so we have a new lieutenant, just came on board. He'll officially be taking over that lieutenant spot at December 1st. Still leaves us 2 vacant lieutenant spots, we just don't have, we have nobody that's qualified to take those spots. And as an idea to even get the fire officer, It's 60 hours of entry level, the 36 hours of firefighter 1, the 20 hours of hazmat, 36 hours for firefighter 2. Then it's a 60-hour fire officer 1 class, but to get state certified, you also have to take emergency services instructor, which is a 40-hour class, to be able to get your state certification as fire officer 1. And that's required by the state as of 2009-ish. They put a 5-year window on it, but after that date, you're required to have fire officer 1 to be an officer in a fire department anywhere in the state, volunteer or otherwise. Madison gets around it. They do a 3-hour leadership class for their officers. It's a minimum of 3-hour leadership class, and that has been approved by the state. But you have to go through a whole process to get it approved by the state. So every fire department, you have to have fire officer 1 now to be any type of operational officer. We are currently advertising for a full-time firefighter medic. Donna Bell resigned the end of October, take a position at Sun Prairie EMS. We are anticipating a second position opening up as well right after the new year. I will gladly take suggestions on where to advertise. We're advertising statewide at this point. But I can tell you the market for full-time staff is tight at best. Just locally, Deer Grove is hiring for 2 full-time medics. Wanakee is going to be hiring for several medics. Middleton's hiring for medics. Stoughton is now hiring for 2 firefighter AEMTs and paying a higher starting wage than we're paying for firefighter medics. So there's a lot of hiring going on. Unfortunately, Madison just came out with their latest list, and they scooped up people from many different departments. We now have to try and hire to fill those spots. So we'll see what we get. The process is open until the 15th of December, and we'll see what we get for it. We have 1 applicant so far. Other than that, we got a nice volunteer thing coming up December 14th. We got invited to come serve dinner to some of our residents at 101 Frostwoods. So the chief and I will be over there serving dinner, Christmas dinner to their residents, along with a few other folks from both departments, I'm sure. We just went through our ISO recertification. If you're not familiar with that, it's the insurance service office something. It's got like 6 words, but it's only 3 letters. And what it really does is set the fire insurance for the city. So the lower your level, the lower our fire insurance is for our residents. So I just sat with the chief from Cudahy and went through the ISO recertification last week. And we may actually be able to come down to a 2. We'll see when the numbers come back. We're currently a 3. It goes up to 9.
Actually affects your fire insurance cost?
Yes.
Well, if it goes down to 2, will our insurance go down?
Yes. Best you can get is a 1, hard to get. There's a couple in the state. I think Oshkosh is a 1. There might be 1 other, not very many. It takes a lot of money to get to a 1. Basically a fully funded career department with the minimum number of firefighters on shift every day to meet NFPA requirements, which is not realistic for a lot of agencies. 2 is pretty good.
Yeah.
What we have going on here 2 would be a really nice benefit. And I think I'll stop there. I think that's pretty good. I'm happy to answer any questions.
That was fascinating about insurance. What the city actually does, what it's rated, the fire department, or that affects your insurance throughout the city.
Yes.
Wow.
Not as important as it used to be, but still important when it comes to fire insurance. Used to be everybody nationwide built everything off ISO. And there's been some move to get away from that in some areas, but not in Wisconsin. So
Fascinating.
Do you have an estimate in the dollar value
I
you're
haven't.
talking for the resident?
that I can't do. Once he gets back to me, and I'll see what I can bring out of it.
It might make more sense for a place like clinic. Like, it would probably be a significant difference for a clinic.
For commercial
Their
insurance.
fire insurance
Yeah.
for the new clinics on
The clinics, commercial
Broadway?
property.
Yeah, restaurants,
For business.
oh yeah, it affects commercial insurance.
For your resident, it probably is pretty good.
Yeah, because
Okay.
fire insurance is a very small part of your homeowner's
Yeah.
insurance,
Gotcha,
but it would still reduce that portion of it, but
but it's good for business.
yes,
Yes. Wow, which is big, yeah. Yeah,
insurance is a big thing,
or our condos,
yeah.
condos, apartment buildings, those are the ones that, I know WPS was very interested in this over the years.
Yes.
Oh. That's interesting cost for it, so. Alright,
I was asked, and I remembered, Larry, to give an update on the public safety building.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Are you gonna do that?
Well, the update,
Well, we have a pretty good update.
was the contract signed?
Contract
Okay,
is,
I missed that part.
the contract is through council.
Yeah.
There may have been a little legalese that was still happening, but it had been approved at the council level.
Yep.
So there is a contract in place.
For the architect and engineer, Larry, so we're at that phase of the game where the architect and engineer has been identified by the there's ad hoc technically committee. And council, as Oliver Holmquist mentioned, has approved that firm, and I think it's in the hands of legal right now, if not already signed, with Bray Architects. And so staff is sort of in a waiting game right now for the ball to get rolling, and we're waiting for the instructions from the mayor. There's a lot of work that needs to be done, especially as it informs the the advisory building referendum and the operating referendum. That'll be happening November
A year from
of-
now.
Yes, 2024.
Well, the referendum will be in November, but
Yeah.
the work will
Correct.
start well before that.
Yes,
Correct.
yes, all the work for,
So I'm real concerned about the public safety building because I went to the open house in the police department, and they really need better facilities for evidence security and for where they handle possible narcotics and other drugs. And there are things relating to the fire service. And I would also like to see in the public safety building a multi-purpose room that could be used as an emergency operations center should we have another event like the flood in 2018, where we can have a fully coordinated response to that event, have security for the area that's affected so that we know who's going in and who's coming out, because there's some liability exposures for the city with those things. So I worked for Wisconsin Emergency Management for 28 years and took part in my share of disaster responses, both in the state and out of the state. And the city right now is really not prepared to handle some of the legal implications that could arise if we were to have a volunteer injured in response. Manitowoc County had a tornado where an individual was injured. They were signed up with the county to be there. They were accounted for. Their state statutes limits the jurisdiction's liability to $1 per capita. So Manitowoc County at the time had a population of 51,000. And just before I retired, I talked to our attorney, and she told me that individual's medical bills had just exceeded $500,000. So it's really important that some of those things get considered as we go forward with the public safety building and any kind of disaster response. There are a lot of liability issues there. So.
Thanks for bringing that up, Larry. Yeah, this is, the room we're in right now is a room frequently used by all city staff. And so the schedule fills up just to utilize this room. So think about in terms of interviewing victims of crime, et cetera. We only have hard interview rooms currently, hard being, it looks like a prison, set up with, hard chairs that you can't move out. So it's not great for victims, but the list goes on and on and on. In fact, CIVMIC, our city's insurer, just did an assessment and evaluation of things that we need to fix. One of them includes proper, ventilation for our, evidence room where we're, you're asking your officers to process if something's fentanyl or not, right? And so, I think hopefully, please spread the message with your neighbors too. And we're gonna work with the, the firm that the city hired with respect to, informing the public on why this is being considered. But at any time anyone wants to do a tour, I think Jerry's nodding his head now, including your neighbors, please let them know we're happy to give a tour, or our staff give a tour of our facilities, so. Yeah, desperately needed. This is the last place I show people for, like, during the application process. I get them hooked. And I was like, all right, now you're ready for this. Yeah. Where are you gonna work?
You'll be in your car most of the time.
Yeah. Those are nice. You do a good job with the cars. Yeah, okay. All right, thank you, Larry. We have a new dispatcher, due to a vacancy. One of our dispatchers is resigning from her full-time position. She's taken a position with another agency. I just got an update. We currently have 14 applicants. I haven't reviewed any of those.
Wow.
To see if they met the sort of limit, the threshold of moving on to the qualifications, but that's promising that we have 15 applicants. So we should start that process here of selecting that individual soon. Our dispatcher's last day is this weekend. However, she's agreed to stay on as a part-time dispatcher anytime we're in a pinch. So you probably will see from me in the coming meetings, maybe January or February, possibly coming to you with some added language to our pursuit policy. If you remember, pursuit policy is one of the policies that the council, this body needs to review, and then council needs to review and or approve or reject. But I'm part of a work group with the Dane County Chiefs Association right now, in which we're exploring adding language to policies as it relates to when agencies go into other jurisdictions and which is like everybody. So you can probably guess who might be asking for that language, but the language doesn't do anything that is outside of what we do now. I think what's going to come up this work group is language that says, hey, Monona, for example, just an example, just an example, a hypothetical.
Yeah.
If you go into another jurisdiction, say for example, Madison, and Madison makes the request that you terminate the pursuit because of certain articulable factors that you may not be aware of. For example, basketball game at the Kohl Center letting out, or farmers market, things that, Monona doesn't deal with, right? Then you shall consider that to be a cause and reason to terminate. It's what we do now, folks, right? Like that's a factor that the officers have to weigh in a determination on, should I continue to pursue this? Is it worth it or is it not? But that's just how our officers operate. That's not necessarily how the rest of Dane County operates. And so being a team player, I'm one of the many people on the work group that says, I don't mind that language, but I can't do it outright. I'm gonna need to go to this body and then council. But that work group is still sort of in the middle, and it's running. And we have another meeting in January. So the goal is to bring whatever product from that work group to the Dane County Chiefs, the bigger meeting, and then see where it goes from there. So I just wanted to put that on your radar, so you're not like, where's this coming from? You haven't heard it before. That's something. We're actively working on our plans for reunification and support centers. So Larry, sort of right up your alley too, and Connie as well. So the county is working on a document with respect to sort of a standard reunification plan. We're taking that document and adapting a lot of the concepts in it and making our own. And we're doing a lot of training for staff, for department head staff, and then for potentially volunteers and supervisory staff that may be able to assist, because likely police and fire are going to be tied up.
Yes.
And so we're going to need other folks to step to the plate, such as the library staff or Parks and Rec, et cetera, to help get that reunification and support center standing, so that You know, that takes one more thing off of our plate. Heaven forbid if there's a tragic event, and so it doesn't need to be as significant as the flood incident, which was huge. We probably could have benefited from a standardized reunification center for the fatal fire. Right. So, and I would agree, Larry, in terms of, and that's something Jerry and I have already talked about, a functioning ELC center that can double as a conference room when not in use, but that it's turned into an ELC or a command center when needed. So that's certainly something that I'm going to strongly advocate for the new building as well. Okay, safety, we'll talk about that. All right. I'm going to end on a good note. So we just 2 days ago, I received an email from an individual who did a ride along with one of your officers. And, you know, I'm just going to say the officer's name, not the individual who did this ride along who sent me this email. Subject to it just summarizes sort of what I see every day, and I told myself I need to do a better job of sharing that with the public. So if you bear with me, it's 3 paragraphs long. I'll get through it quick. Okay. Dear Chief Cheney, it was a pleasure to meet you and your staff prior to my ride along with Officer Hickman on Thursday. After talking with members of your department throughout the shift, it is clear that you are admired and blah, blah, blah. We'll skip that part. That you are admired and respected for your leadership. That's very kind of him. And then goes on to say, I'm also grateful to you, Lieutenant Weigel and Officer Hickman, for allowing me to see firsthand what community policing really means. Throughout the shift, I was witness to many examples of Officer Hickman strengthening ties with the community through interactions with the public and a general positive presence. A simple wave to citizens of all ages as we patrolled showed me that this officer's focus was on connecting with the community. I was especially impressed with his patience along with other members of the force when dealing with an obviously intoxicated man who had been causing a disturbance in his home. Despite being verbally abused, Officer Hickman used his prior experience and training to maintain patience and make sure the scene was safe. Frustrating as it was that the wife did not choose to press charges or even make a statement, it was obvious to me that Officer Hickman was genuinely concerned for everyone involved, and I'm sure that he relayed this during his shift. Needless to say, if Officer Hickman represents the type of professionalism, competence, and compassion that you lead your department with, the citizens of Monona can feel safe and confident in its police force. Thank you again for the opportunity. So I see some good stuff every day, and we do some internal kudos, and I send messages, I call, we have these atta-girls that I complete and atta-boys, but I don't do enough to share those with you. We have our annual awards that we just started last year, but it's things like this that I'm going to try every now and then to just share with you all so that you hear some of the good work being done. And that's all I have.
You did to us in Spanish.
Sí.
And then we have our famous item on here is this building and code inspection. One thing to mention is I wonder at some point we might even consider adding this actually to the ZBA. So the zoning board of appeals is often, if there's building or code inspection disagreement, the appeal goes to that group. It doesn't come to this group. So there were portions of why it was here, and it has to do more with the unsightly ordinance code enforcement. But when it comes down to other aspects of code, it could go into lots of different directions depending on what it is. So at some point we might want to consider maybe eliminating it here and figuring out where it best fits when something arises. Is if it comes here for a reason, it's going to come here for a reason, regardless if we have it on the item or not.
But first you have to get the guy to show up.
Well, that's what I mean is like we have building inspection disagreements that go to ZBA.
Oh, so the building inspector is there anyway in some cases.
Yes,
Oh,
which is different than the code enforcement officer,
okay.
which that's where some of this originally started, because when we initiated an ordinance around unsightly premise,
Okay.
it then came with code enforcement individual to help implement that. And so that was really under this body's oversight.
Just consider it a public safety issue, unsightly.
Yes. So at some point we'll decide if it fits here or not, we'll go somewhere else. And police is fighting. Question?
And Joe's not here, so we're gonna go.
Perfect. And then our next meeting is December 27th, which will be the Culver's Cup hockey tournament, so there will be no meeting. All right, perfect, that makes it easy.
I'll be on a boat in the Caribbean, so you can have the meeting if you want.
You'll be learning Spanish, right?
Good for you.
If I drink
Good
enough
for
rum,
Converse with anyone.
Awesome, but I hope everybody enjoys the next few days with family and friends and the upcoming holidays throughout December and January. We'll see you all in January.
Sounds good.
Happy Thanksgiving.
happy Thanksgiving.
Happy
Holidays,
Thanksgiving.
everyone.
Yeah, we just
Happy
need a
Thanksgiving,
motion for
everyone.
adjournment.
Thank you.
Let's to adjourn.
In a second,
Second.
all right, all those in favor say aye.
Hi,
Angela, can you give me a call next week?
I sure can.
Anytime Tuesday through Friday, I'll be in the office.
Tuesday through Friday. Okay, I sure will.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Happy